I've stood at this post for 11 years. 11 years of rain, of summer heat baking through my ceremonial jacket, of tourists pressing their faces against the iron gates like children at a bakery window. 11 years of standing so still that pigeons have landed on my bearskin cap and used it as a resting perch while I didn't even blink. I have seen things at this post that would make ordinary men reach for a stiff drink. But the morning Princess Ilara came to me, a 7-year-old girl in muddy Wellington boots and a nightgown under her winter coat, walking alone across the south lawn at 6:30 in the morning, holding something in her cupped hands like it was the most fragile thing in the world. That morning changed everything I thought I knew about what it meant to do this job. That morning, I broke every rule in the Renholt Royal Household Guard Protocol. And I would do it again, every single time. Set up. You have to understand what Caldenmere Palace is like at dawn. Most people only ever see it from outside the gates. They see the limestone facade glowing gold in the afternoon light, the twin towers with the Renholt pennants snapping in the wind, the long gravel drive lined with horse chestnuts that turn copper and amber every October. They take their photographs. They buy their postcards in the little gift shop on the corner of Wren Lane. They go home with a story about how they saw the palace. What they don't see is what the palace looks like before the city wakes up. I do. The south lawn at that hour is a different world. The grass is still silver with dew, and the mist sits low over it like it's thinking about something. The palace walls lose their grandeur in the gray early light. They look older, heavier, more like something that has survived centuries of weather than something designed to impress. The only sounds are the gravel crunching under the night shift change, the distant call of a wood pigeon somewhere in the horse chestnut row, and the slow, rhythmic clip of boots on stone as my colleague Pemberton finished his circuit of the east wing. My post was the Southgate sentry box, a wooden structure painted black just wide enough for one man standing to attention. 2 paces to my left, the iron gate. 2 paces to my right, the chest-high wall with its decorative iron spikes. In front of me, the gravel drive, and beyond it, the lawn, and beyond that, the palace itself. It was October, a Tuesday. I remember because Tuesdays in October are the worst days for weather at Caldenmere. The wind comes off the river and cuts straight through your jacket no matter how many layers you've put on underneath. I remember thinking that morning that my fingers, curled inside my white gloves around the barrel of my ceremonial rifle, had stopped feeling like my own fingers about 20 minutes ago. They felt like 4 wooden sticks attached to a thumb. That's the kind of cold it was. The sky was doing that thing it does over Caldenmere in autumn, purple and gray at the edges, with one thin strip of pale orange along the horizon behind the palace roof. Not beautiful, not ugly, just there, waiting to become morning. I had been on post since 4 a.m., 2 hours to go, until my relief arrived. I was counting the seconds, not literally, but in that way you do when time gets thick and heavy and you need your mind to have something to hold on to. The cold does that. It strips away all the noise in your head until you're left with just the immediate facts. Cold, dark, still, post, duty, keep standing. I heard the side door open. Not the main entrance. That one has a buzz and a weight to it you can feel from the south gate, 50 meters away. This was the smaller door, set into the east-facing wall of the palace's residential wing. The servants' entrance, technically, though nobody called it that anymore. Household staff used it in the morning, delivery vans used it twice a week, and occasionally, very occasionally, members of the royal family used it when they didn't want to go through the formal front approach. The sound of it opening meant nothing by itself. Might have been kitchen staff, might have been a footman with an early errand. I filed it away in the part of my brain reserved for logged sounds and kept my eyes on the gate. But then I heard the gravel. Small footsteps, light, uneven, the kind of walk that hasn't quite sorted out its rhythm yet. A child's walk. I moved my eyes, not my head. You learn to do that at this post. The bearskin doesn't move, the rifle doesn't move, but the eyes can move. Coming across the south lawn, threading her way through the low mist with the purposeful uncertainty of someone who knew exactly where they wanted to go but wasn't entirely sure of the path, was a small figure in a red winter coat. Under the coat, a white nightgown. The hem was already wet with dew. On her feet, green Wellington boots, the kind with small frogs printed on them. The left boot had a crack in the sole. I could see it from where I stood because she was walking in that slightly pigeon-toed way small children sometimes do, and the crack showed itself with every step. Her hair was unbrushed, dark and thick, sticking out at odd angles where she'd slept on it. She had clearly dressed herself in a hurry, or not really dressed at all, just thrown the coat on over her night clothes and jammed her feet into the wellies. She was holding something in both hands, cupped against her chest with an intensity that is almost impossible to describe unless you've seen a child carry something precious. The way small hands curl around things they are afraid to drop. The way the body leans slightly inward, as if to shield it with its own warmth. She was walking straight toward me. I did not move. Protocol. You do not move for anything short of a direct threat. A child crossing the palace lawn is not a threat. A child crossing the palace lawn at 6:30 in the morning in a nightgown and muddy boots is a concern, but not for the South Gate sentry to address. That is a matter for the household duty officer, for the family liaison, for the residential staff. Not for me. I told myself that for about 15 seconds. She stopped 2 meters in front of me. I had seen Princess Alara before, of course. Every guard on regular rotation at Caldenmere had seen her. She appeared at royal engagements occasionally, always impeccably turned out, always photographed from a respectful distance by the palace's official press team. In the photographs, she looked like what she was, a princess. Neat, composed, positioned. The small person standing in front of me in the early morning mist looked like what she also was. A child who had been awake most of the night, who had something wrong, and who had come to the only person she could think of. She looked up at me. She was not crying, but her eyes had that particular quality, swollen slightly, red at the rims. That meant she had been crying recently, and had stopped only because she'd run out of tears or run out of time for it. She said, "Excuse me." The voice was very small, very careful. The voice of someone who has been told many times about indoor voices and not bothering people and wait your turn, and who has taken all of that on board, and who is using it now even though what they are about to say is urgent. I did not move. I did not speak. That is the rule. She said, "I know you're not supposed to talk. I know that's the rule." She looked down at her hands, at whatever she was holding, and then back up at me. "But I need help," she said, "and I don't know who else to ask." Build tension. The thing she was holding was a bird. A wren, I think, very small, brown and rust-colored with a tiny curved beak and feet like bent wire. It was alive. I could see the rapid flutter of its breathing, but it was not well. One wing sat at a wrong angle, not broken dramatically but displaced somehow, held slightly away from its body in a way that is not natural for a wren at rest. She had found it, she explained, in a very quiet and very steady voice that cost her something to maintain. She had found it the previous evening, near the hedge at the bottom of the east garden. She'd seen it there when she went out after tea, trying to find somewhere private to read. It was on the ground, not flying. She'd gone back to her room to get her book and thought about it all through dinner and couldn't sleep because of it, and gone back out at midnight. But the staff on duty had sent her back inside and said they'd look at it in the morning, and she'd been terrified that a fox would get it in the night. So she'd gone back at 5 in the morning, before first light, and it was still there. She'd picked it up. She was telling me this with the focused control of a child who had decided that being upset was not useful and that being clear was what the situation required. But her hands, the hands holding the bird, were trembling. Finally, like a tuning fork after it's been struck. "I can't find anyone," she said. "The duty officer is on the phone. Mrs. Calloway is in the kitchen, but she said it was too early and to ask at breakfast. I went to the head groundsman's office, but he doesn't start until 8. She looked at me with those careful, tired eyes. "I don't want it to die," she said, simply, not dramatically, just as a fact that she had established and was now presenting to me as the core of the problem. Now, let me tell you what happens in a guard's mind in a moment like that. There is the protocol. The protocol is not complicated. It is comprehensive. It covers every eventuality from a fire in the palace to an unauthorized vehicle approaching the gate to a suspicious package left by the wall. It covers crowd control and dignitary arrivals, and how to behave if you are spoken to by a member of the public, and how to behave if you are spoken to by a member of the royal family. What it does not cover, in any of its 47 pages, is what to do if a princess in a nightgown brings you a wounded bird at dawn and asks for your help. I stood there. I could feel the cold through my gloves and the weight of my rifle and the slight ache across my shoulders from the hours of standing to. And I looked at this small person in front of me with her cupped hands and her blown-apart hair and her cracked Wellington boot and her red-rimmed eyes that were not crying, were absolutely refusing to cry, and I made a decision. The decision took about 3 seconds. I moved. Not dramatically. I didn't swing my rifle to my shoulder or snap to parade rest or execute any of the formal transitions you're trained to perform when you shift from standing orders. I just turned, slightly, enough to face her properly, to look at her as a person and not as something in my field of vision. I spoke. My voice came out rougher than I expected. The cold had done something to it. Or maybe I hadn't used it in 4 hours and it had gone a little dusty from disuse. I said, "Let me see." She held out her hands. The wren sat there in her cupped palms, impossibly small, its feathers slightly ruffled, breathing in that fast, shallow way that small, frightened things breathe. One bright eye, like a bead of dark water, caught the early light and held it. I looked at it for a moment. Then I looked at her. There's something I should say here because I think it matters. I am not a soft man. 11 years in the Renholt Royal Guard does not produce soft men. You stand in heat and cold, in rain that gets under your collar and sweat that pools in your boots, in crowds and in silence, for hours on end, holding yourself in a posture of absolute discipline. And you do it not because you feel anything particular about any given moment, but because you have decided, have committed in the deepest part of yourself, that this is what you do, that this is who you are, that the post will be kept. But something about this child, something about the care with which she was holding this tiny, struggling thing, something about the fact that she had been awake since midnight, worrying about a bird. Something about the fact that she had come to me, to the one person she knew was awake and present, and who was supposed to be untouchable, because she had run out of other options. I said, "What's your name?" She told me, "I'm not going to repeat it here, not in this document. I'll call her what I've called her in my head ever since, Miss Alara. That's enough." She said, "What's yours?" I told her. She nodded like we just established the terms of an agreement, 2 people meeting properly, names exchanged, ready to proceed. "Is it going to be okay?" she said, looking at the bird. I didn't answer that immediately. There are 2 wrong answers to that question when you don't know. False reassurance is a kindness that turns into a betrayal later. Honesty without care is just cruelty with better intentions. I found the space between them. I said, "I don't know yet, but I know someone who might." Climax. What I did next is the part that, technically, I should not have done. I left my post. A Royal Guard does not leave his post. This is not a suggestion or a guideline or a point on a spectrum. It is the cornerstone of the entire thing. You stay. Whatever happens, you stay. The post is the commitment. The post is the point. If you leave the post, you are not a guard anymore, you're just a man in a uniform. I have thought about this a great deal since. I've turned it over in the quiet hours of long shifts, examining it, looking for the angle that makes it comfortable. I haven't found one. What I did was, strictly speaking, a breach. No way around it. But here's what I've also concluded. There are things that the rules are designed to protect, and there are moments when the strict application of the rules becomes its own kind of failure. I called Pemberton on the radio. He was on the East Wing circuit, still 4 minutes out from the South Gate area. I told him I needed him at the South Post now for a non-emergency situation that I could not leave unattended. He came without questions. Pemberton is good like that. He has a kind of practical intelligence that doesn't waste time on the unnecessary parts. He arrived, took one look at the situation, the princess, the bird, the pre-dawn mist, and he just nodded, took up position, and said nothing. He covered the post. I had approximately 12 minutes before the shift supervisor would complete his own circuit and notice the change in position. 12 minutes was enough. I said to Miss Alara, "Come with me." She came, no questions. She just fell into step beside me, still holding the bird, matching my pace as best she could with her Wellingtons on the gravel. I took her to the groundsman's workshop. The building is at the northeast corner of the inner garden, a long, low structure that smells of oil and cut grass and fertilizer. The door is never locked. Groundsmen and locked doors don't have much use for each other. I knew this because the guards and the groundsmen share a break room in the lower basement on cold weather shifts, and the head groundsman, a man named Torben, had told me once that he'd rather lose a pair of secateurs than miss a minute's sleep looking for the key. I pushed the door open. It was warmer inside. The smell of it hit you, the good, deep smell of things that work with living things. Rope and compost and old wood and something faintly sweet that I couldn't identify. I found the work light, clicked it on. Along the far wall was a long bench, and on it Torben was a methodical man with a system for everything. There was a section dedicated to wildlife first aid. Not official, not mandated. Just the result of years working in grounds that backed onto the Ren River estuary, where injured wildlife was a routine fact of life. A shallow cardboard box, lined with an old fleece, a small bottle of electrolyte solution, a pair of soft cottonwork gloves folded to one side. I had seen Torben use this setup once before, 2 summers ago, for a duckling that had somehow ended up separated from its mother on the ornamental pond. I'd been on patrol when he found it, and I'd stopped to watch him work. He'd been brisk about it, not unkind, but efficient, the way experienced people are efficient. He'd explained, without being asked, what he was doing and why. I had remembered, I don't know why, I just had. I found a clean cloth. I lined the bottom of the shallow box with it. I checked the fleece for debris, there was none, and folded it over the cloth to make a nest of sorts. Something small and warm enough to hold body heat. Miss Alara watched every single thing I did. She did not speak. She had the quality, which I have noticed in some children and almost never in adults, of being able to watch something very carefully and not fill the silence with questions. She was learning. She understood somehow that learning required quiet. I said, lay him down gently, on his side, not on the wing that's damaged. She did, her hands shook very slightly, but she was steady enough. The bird made a small sound, not distress exactly, just adjustment, and then lay still in the nest of cloth and fleece. Is the wing broken? She said. I don't know, I said. It might be dislocated. That's different from broken, more treatable. She considered this. What's the difference? I explained it briefly. Fracture versus dislocation. The tissue involved. The likelihood of recovery. I am not a veterinarian. I told her I was not a veterinarian. I told her that what I knew from watching Torben and from common sense, and that she should ask someone with actual expertise as soon as one was available. She said, but right now, you're the expertise we've got. She said it without irony, without flattery, just as a plain assessment of the current situation. I said, then right now we keep him warm and calm. Heat, stress, and shock are what kills small birds, not the injury itself. If he's calm and warm, he has a chance. She pulled a small stool from under the bench and sat down next to the box. She folded her hands in her lap and watched the bird breathe. I should have gone. Pemberton was covering, but the supervisor circuit was running, and I had already stretched the informal arrangement past what was comfortable. I should have said my piece, set up the box, and walked back to the post. I stayed for another 4 minutes. I'm not entirely sure why. Something in the set of her shoulders, the concentration in her face as she watched the bird. The way she had not asked me whether she could stay or gone or done any of the dozen things I might have expected a child in her position to do. She had simply sat down, as if staying was the obvious thing. As if there was nothing else she could possibly do, but be present with the small things she had carried through the cold morning. I said, I have to go back. She looked up. Will you come back, she said, after your shift? I said, someone will, I'll make sure of it. She nodded, then she looked back at the bird. He's breathing better, she said, I think. I looked, she was right. The rapid, shallow flutter of arrival had settled into something slightly deeper, slightly more even. The bird had stopped trembling. It lay in the small cloth nest with its one good wing folded against its body, and its bright bead eye was open, reflecting the workroom light. He is, I said. I turned toward the door. She said, Corporal. I stopped, turned back. She was still looking at the bird, but she said very quietly in that careful small person voice, Thank you for not pretending you couldn't hear me. I didn't have an answer for that, not one that words were the right material for. I just nodded once, the small, honest kind, and went back to my post. Resolution, Part 1. Pemberton was where I'd left him. The supervisor's circuit had passed 2 minutes ago. I slid back into position without a word between us, the kind of wordless exchange that people who have worked alongside each other for a long time manage without effort. He did glance sideways at me just once as I took my rifle back. He didn't ask anything. After a moment I said, very quietly, because I knew he deserved some kind of acknowledgement even if I couldn't give him details. "Small situation. Handled." He said equally quietly, "Aye." And that was that. The morning came properly after that. The city behind the gates started its slow engine of sound, distant buses, a dog somewhere, the first faint pulse of the river traffic on the Ren. The sky moved from purple-gray to a flat pearl color, and then, as the sun finally got its act together, to something thin and cold and genuinely October. At 8:15, my relief arrived. I did not immediately go to my quarters, which is what I would normally have done. 4 hours sleep before the afternoon shift is not a luxury, it is a biological requirement. Instead, I went to the groundsman's office and woke Torben. He took it well. He was one of those people who wake from sleep already 3/4 functional. By the time I'd explained the situation, the bird, the princess, the workshop, he was already pulling on his boots. He said, "Left wing, you said," drooping slightly. I said yes. He said, "Coracoid joint, probably. Seen it with wrens before. Usually does all right if you leave it." He went to the workshop. He was gone for about 7 minutes. When he came back, he reported that the bird was resting comfortably in the box, that the princess had not left its side, and that he'd assessed the wing as most likely a joint strain rather than a true dislocation, minor, and with a reasonable chance of full recovery over 2 to 3 weeks if the bird was kept somewhere safe and quiet. He also reported that the princess had questioned him very thoroughly on the subject of wren anatomy, and had asked for 2 separate recommendations for specialist avian veterinarians in the city. He was grinning when he said it. I said, "Who knows she's there?" "Her lady-in-waiting," he said. "I radioed the house. Everyone's been looking for her for 40 minutes. "How's that going?" He considered. "The lady-in-waiting was not best pleased," he said. "But Her Highness told her she'd been under the care of a member of the Royal Household Guard the entire time, and that everything was completely fine." I thought about that. "Is that accurate?" he said. I said, "More or less." He nodded. "She also," he said, and there was something in his voice now that was different, something quieter. "She also told the lady-in-waiting that she had been helped by the best guard in the kingdom." Her words. He looked at me for a moment. Then he went back to his workshop. I stood there in the cold for a minute, on the gravel path between the workshop and the palace, with the morning properly arrived around me and the city making its full morning sound, and the pale autumn sun doing its best against the chestnuts. Then I went to get some sleep. Ending line, part 1. That evening, when I came back on shift, someone had left something on the ledge inside my sentry box. A small drawing, crayon on notepaper, done in the quick, concentrated way children draw when they are trying to be accurate rather than impressive. It was a wren and a guard, standing side by side. At the bottom, in careful handwriting that was still working out the difference between its letters, "Thank you for staying." I folded it twice and put it in my breast pocket. I have it still. 3 weeks after the bird. That's when the second thing happened. And unlike the first, which had been quiet and private and small in the way that the most important things often are, the second thing happened in front of everyone. In front of the television cameras, the press pool, the visiting foreign dignitaries, the entire assembled household staff, and approximately 400 members of the public who had gathered at the main gates for the Kingdom of Renholt's annual harvest ceremony. In front of all of them. And it was the guard, me, who had to make a decision in about 2 seconds flat, with no protocol to guide him and no superior to ask and get it right. What happened next is what the palace staff talked about for the following 6 months. What happened next is what led to a formal commendation, a private audience, and a question from the palace's chief household officer that I still haven't entirely answered. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start where I always start. At the post, set up, the harvest ceremony is one of Renholt's oldest royal traditions. It dates back, according to the palace historians, some 300 years, to the reign of King Aldrich II, who instituted it as a public thanksgiving after a particularly brutal winter had been followed by an unexpectedly bountiful harvest. What had begun as a genuine expression of collective relief had, over the centuries, become one of those events that exist primarily as tradition, magnificent, ceremonial, and about as organically alive as a taxidermied pheasant. Nevertheless, it was significant. The royal family appeared on the palace steps. The Lord Warden of the Harvest read a proclamation. Children from the local schools carried sheaves of wheat through the main gates in a formal procession. There was music live from the Caldenmere household band, very good at what they did even if what they did was deeply formal. There were speeches, there were handshakes, there were cameras. The whole event, from gates opening to formal close, ran approximately 2.5 hours. Every member of the household guard on duty that day had been briefed twice. I had my assignment, ceremonial post at the base of the south steps. Visible, formal, part of the picture. No interaction with the public unless they breached the ceremonial rope line. No deviation from position. Represent the guard. The morning was cold but clear. October had thinned out a bit by then, the chestnuts were mostly bare, and the fallen leaves had been swept from the main drive by the groundskeeping team the previous day, leaving the pale gravel crisp and purposeful. The sky was high and gray-blue, the kind you get in late autumn that is bleak and beautiful at the same time. By 10 a.m., the south lawn had been arranged with the precision of a stage set. Rope lines separated the public access zone from the ceremonial zone. The household staff were in position. The band was assembled on the raised platform to the east of the steps. The press pool, a controlled group, credentialed, positioned in their designated box 40 meters from the steps, had their cameras ready. Along the outer perimeter, uniformed officers from the city kept the public viewing area orderly. The public themselves were in fine form. That particular kind of crowd that gathers for this sort of thing, mixed, good-natured, patient, festive without being unruly. Families with children, older people in good coats, tourists with cameras. The kind of crowd that has queued early and is pleased with their spot and is not in any way looking for trouble. I was at my post by 9:45, standing to, rifle-shouldered, everything correct. The family emerged from the main doors at 10:15. I will not describe all of them, that's not the story. The story is that at the back of the formal group, walking with the careful attention of a child who has been told several times this morning about posture and pace and not fidgeting, was Miss Alara. She was formally dressed proper ceremony wear, nothing like the red coat and nightgown. Her hair was done. She looked the part completely. But as the group descended the stone steps and took their positions on the ceremonial platform, I saw her eyes move. Just once, quickly, the practiced sideways glance of someone who has been trained to look straight ahead, but who can't entirely stop themselves from looking for something. She found me. Brief, not obvious. A flicker of recognition that someone not paying close attention would not have caught. I was paying close attention. I always am. The ceremony began. The Lord Warden's proclamation was 23 minutes long. I know because I've stood through it before. It covers the history, the tradition, the gratitude, and the names of all the beneficiary community organizations for the year. It is read in a voice that manages to be simultaneously impressive and soporific. The crowd is respectful. The cameras roll. Miss Alara stood at her designated position on the platform. She was very still, very composed. Too still, actually. I noticed it at about the 12-minute mark. Not anything obvious, just a quality of stillness that wasn't the same as the formal trained stillness of the adults around her. This was a different kind. The kind where the body stops moving because it's trying not to draw attention to itself. She was pale, not dramatically pale, but perceptibly, to someone watching, as I was watching, paler than she had been at the start. She was sweating slightly. I could see it at the temple, a fine bright sheen that did not fit the morning air. Her hands held formally in front of her had shifted. The fingers had interlaced, not nervously, with effort. The deliberate interlacing of someone who needs their hands to be doing something controlled, because otherwise they might not stay controlled. Something was wrong. Build tension. This is the part I need to explain carefully, because what happened next required me to make a series of very fast assessments that I would normally have weeks to second guess and only seconds to act on. Assessment 1, the child on the platform was not well. Assessment 2, she was aware of this and was trying to manage it, alone, in front of 400 people and a live press pool. Assessment 3, if she managed it successfully, no one would ever know, and the ceremony would proceed without incident. Assessment 4, if she didn't manage it successfully, if she fainted or stumbled or became visibly distressed on a platform in front of cameras and a crowd, the resulting images would be everywhere within minutes, and she would have no memory of what happened to her, only of other people's accounts of what it had looked like. Assessment 5, the adults closest to her on the platform were all facing forward toward the Lord Warden in the formal attention position required by the ceremony. They were doing exactly what they had been told to do. None of them were watching her. Assessment 6, I was watching her. I was the only one watching her. The Lord Warden was on paragraph 17 of 23. 6 minutes left minimum. I watched her breathe, shallow, controlled, trying to stay in front of it. At the 14-minute mark, she shifted her weight very carefully to her left foot. At the 15-minute mark, she shifted it back. She was having a conversation with her own body, a negotiation, the body saying, I need to sit down, the child saying, not here, not now, please. At 16 minutes, her eyes closed briefly. Just briefly, a second, maybe two. When they opened, they looked for me. I don't know if she meant to, I don't know if it was conscious, but her eyes, finding something to hold onto in the swimming gray-blue morning, found me. I looked back at her. In the Renholt Royal Guard, there is no protocol for eye contact with a member of the royal family during a formal ceremony. You are simply not supposed to need one because you are not supposed to make eye contact. You face forward, you hold your position. You are part of the setting, not part of the event. I made eye contact, and I did something that is, in retrospect, either the least professional thing I have done in 11 years of service or the most human. I'm not sure there's a meaningful difference. Very slightly, micro-movement, invisible to anyone not within 3 meters of me, invisible certainly to the press pool 40 meters away. I dipped my chin. Not a nod, a dip, the kind that says, I see you, I'm here, I'm watching. She saw it. Her eyes held mine for one more second. Then she looked forward again. At the 18-minute mark, she swayed. It was tiny, a half-centimeter movement, maybe less, in the plane of her body. The kind of thing you only see if you are trained to read bodies, and you are watching very, very carefully. I was already moving. Climax. Here is what the cameras caught, because I have since been told what the footage shows. A guard breaking from ceremonial position at the base of the south steps, moving with unhurried but absolutely deliberate speed across the flagstone toward the edge of the ceremonial platform. The Lord Warden still reading. The crowd beginning to register the movement, heads turning. The murmur that passes through a crowd when something unexpected appears in its sightlines. The guard reaching the left edge of the platform. A child beginning to tip forward, barely perceptibly. A long, slow lean like a tree deciding whether it's going to fall. The guard's hand coming up, gloved white extended flat, not grabbing, not clutching, just there. A support offered rather than imposed, placed precisely at the small of her back with the discreet correctness of someone who has thought about this for a fraction of a second and gotten it exactly right. The lean arrested. The child steadying. The guard's hand withdrawing once she was steady, just as quietly as it had arrived. And then the guard back to position, stepping backward to the base of the steps, as if the whole thing had been a planned element of the ceremony, as if it had always been part of the choreography. The Lord Warden finished his paragraph. He had not stopped, the ceremony had not stopped. 12 seconds total, from my first movement to my return to post. 12 seconds. Here is what the cameras did not catch, because it was visible only to me. The moment when Miss Alara, having found her balance, having steadied, having resumed the formal posture without anyone around her yet fully registering what had happened, turned her head, the smallest fraction of a turn, toward where I was standing. Not enough to be photographed, not enough to be noticed. Enough for me to see her face. She was not shaken, or if she was, she had already moved past it, already done the internal recalibration that children sometimes do with extraordinary speed when they decide that they are not going to be undone by something. She was not embarrassed, or if she was not going to let it stay. What she was on her face, for exactly the length of time it takes to exhale, was grateful. Not in the performed way, not in the way you learn to be grateful publicly, to project appreciation toward the right cameras at the right angle. In the private way, the way that happens in your face before you've had time to manage it. She saw me see it. And then she faced forward, and stood very straight, and listened to the last 4 minutes of the Lord Warden's proclamation without moving a muscle. She was magnificent, I mean that precisely, not in the grand, formal sense. In the specific, exact sense. She had taken a moment that could have been humiliating, and she had turned it into something that only she and I and Pemberton, who had been watching from his own post, and who told me later with characteristic understatement that he thought I'd been quick, would ever fully know. The ceremony concluded. The applause was warm and long. The school children processed through the gates with their sheaves, the band played the Reinhold anthem, the formal group on the platform descended the steps in order. As Miss Alara passed the base of the steps, the last of the group, as was correct for her position, she was 2 feet from me. She did not stop, she did not look at me, but her hand, as it swung past, touched the cuff of my glove. Just the fingertips. A passing brush, so brief that it was technically deniable, technically nothing. It was not nothing. Resolution Part 2. The fallout came in 2 parts, as fallout tends to. The first part was the report. The household guard has a reporting mechanism for any deviation from ceremonial post position, and I used it before anyone could ask me questions I hadn't prepared answers for. I submitted it within an hour of the ceremony's close. The observation, the assessment, the action taken, the outcome. I used plain language and specific timing, and I did not soften any of it. It was a breach of post position during a formal ceremony. I had made a judgment call. I had broken from position. I named the reason and let the record stand. The second part was the meeting. 3 days after the ceremony, I was called to the chief household officer's rooms on the palace's administrative floor. Major Alden, 22 years in the guard before he went into administration. A man whose face has the quality of a landscape. It records everything that has happened to it, and it gives nothing away about how it feels about any of it. He had the report in front of him. He also had, I noticed, a print of the camera footage, stills, several of them laid in sequence like a short graphic story. He looked at the stills for a moment without speaking. Then he looked at me. He said, "Walk me through your reasoning." I walked him through it. The observation, the assessment, the timeline, the decision, the technique, the withdrawal. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "You identified a deteriorating physical condition in a member of the family from 50 meters during a formal ceremony while maintaining your own ceremonial position in the middle of a public event. You made a risk assessment. You intervened in approximately 12 seconds. You withdrew without causing secondary disruption. And you submitted a full breach of position report within the hour." I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "The breach is noted." He said it the way someone notes something they intend to set aside forever. Then he said, "What made you certain enough to move?" I thought about how to answer that. There are several true answers. The clinical one, the physical signs, the pattern, the assessment process. The tactical one, the crowd, the cameras, the available time window. The simpler one. I gave him the simpler one. I said because she was alone in it, and I was the only one watching. He looked at me for a moment. "Right," he said. He gathered the stills into a neat stack. "Dismissed," he said, and then as I was turning, "Good work, Corporal." Not a roar, not a speech. 2 words in the even voice of a man who does not use praise carelessly. 2 words was enough. Ending line Part 2. A week after the meeting, I received a formal commendation notice in the Guard mail system. A standard document, 3 paragraphs, citing the action of the harvest ceremony with appropriate clinical language. Folded inside the envelope, behind the formal notice, was a second piece of paper. Note paper not official. It said in handwriting I recognized, careful and still working out its letters, but better than it had been 3 weeks ago. The bird is flying. Torben said his wing is healed. He flew from the box this morning. I knew you would want to know. I pinned the commendation on the board in the guardroom, where notices go. The note I kept. Spring comes late to Caldenmere. March is gray. April is impatient. The horse chestnuts along the drive don't trust it until the second week of May, and even then they put their leaves out cautiously, like a hand testing the temperature of water before committing. It was the second week of May when I had my last conversation with Miss Alara before she left for the summer term at her school in the north. And it was in that conversation, standing in the East Garden at 6 in the morning, the city still half asleep behind the walls, that she told me something I have thought about every day since. Not a dramatic thing, not a royal pronouncement or a speech, just a small, honest thing said by a child to a guard in the early light. The kind of thing that is easy to miss if you're not listening. I was listening. Set up. May mornings at Caldenmere are a different thing from October mornings. The same pallor to the early light, but warmer, the gold genuinely gold rather than pale. The same mist on the south lawn, but lighter, burning off faster. The chestnuts in full leaf, the gravel dry, the smell of the river water mixing with cut grass and early flowers from the formal beds around the east wing. I had been assigned to the inner garden patrol for the spring cycle, a change from the south gate, which the rotation system enforces every 6 months to keep the guard familiar with all positions. The inner garden is not a public-facing post. It is exactly what it sounds like. The private gardens behind the east wing residential facade, accessible only through internal gates not visible from the street, walled on 3 sides, a fountain that runs from March to October. Formal beds around the perimeter, a bench near the east wall where I was told the head household chaplain sometimes sat in the mornings to drink his tea and read. The residential wing of the palace looked out directly over this garden. 3 floors of tall windows, the curtains usually drawn until 8 or 9. At 6:10 on a Thursday morning in mid-May, I heard a window open on the 2nd floor. Then I heard footsteps on the internal stair. Then the side door of the east wing residential corridor opened, and Miss Alara came into the garden. She was dressed appropriately this time, a pale blue sweater, proper trousers, boots with no frogs on them. Her hair was brushed. She had clearly been up long enough to be properly awake. She carried something in one hand. A book. She went to the bench by the east wall and sat down, opened the book and began to read. She had not acknowledged my presence. I was on patrol, moving, not stationary, 3 circuits of the inner garden perimeter per hour. I passed within 15 meters of the bench on each circuit. On my 2nd circuit, as I passed, she said, without looking up from her book, "Good morning." I said, "Good morning, miss." On my 3rd circuit, "What are you reading?" She said, "Natural history of Wrenholt birds." A pause. "There's a chapter on wrens." I said, "Any good?" She said, "It says they can live up to 7 years." Another pause. I thought that was interesting. I said, "It is interesting." And then I was past the bench and back into the circuit. This went on for 3 weeks, more or less. The same pattern, she in the garden with her book, me on circuit. A sentence or 2 passed in the easy, undemanding way of people who have established a comfortable understanding, and see no need to fuss it up with ceremony. I learned in those 3 weeks that she was interested in birds generally and in the ecology of the Wren River estuary specifically, that she disliked formal dinners and preferred eating informally in the household kitchen with the staff when she could manage it, that she had a best friend at school who was also interested in natural history, and with whom she planned to go bird watching in the summer term, and that she had twice tried and failed to learn the violin but had better success with the piano. Which she found more honest because, she said, when you pressed a piano key, it did what you asked, but violins were like trying to have a conversation with something that wouldn't quite cooperate. I also learned that she had not forgotten the October incidents, neither of them. She had not mentioned them directly until the morning she came out to say goodbye. Build tension into final conversation. It was the last Thursday before the summer term. She came out at her usual time, sat at her usual bench, opened her book. The morning was properly warm by now, the first genuinely warm morning of the season, the kind where you can feel the heat in the air before the sun has cleared the palace roof. The fountain was running, and the formal beds were in early flower, something white and faintly sweet that I don't know the name of. She read for about 40 minutes. Then she closed the book and just sat. I did my circuits. When I came around past the bench, she looked up. She said, "I leave tomorrow." I said, "I know." She said, "I probably won't see you until autumn." I said, "Probably not." She looked at the fountain for a moment, then at me. She said, "Can I ask you something?" I said, "Of course." She said, "When you left your post, in October, the first morning, the bird." I said, "Yes." "Did you know you weren't supposed to?" I thought about the answer. I said, "Yes." She considered this. The fountain went on. A chestnut leaf fell, spiraling, and landed on the gravel path between us. She said, "Were you scared of getting in trouble?" I thought again, then, a little. She nodded like that was the right answer, like the wrong answer would have been no. She said, "But you came anyway." I said, "Yes." "Why?" And here's where I have to be careful, because the answer I gave her was the true one, which is not always the same as the easy one or the official one. I gave it to her because she was a child who asked her questions plainly and deserved plain answers, and because in my experience, 11 years' worth, people who are trusted with truth usually honor it. I said, because there was something that needed doing, and you needed someone to do it, and I was there. She sat with that for a moment. Then she said, "People say the guard can't move, can't talk, can't do anything except stand there." I said, "That's roughly accurate." She said, "But that's not all you are." I said, "No, it's not." She looked at me with those clear, careful eyes, the ones that had been red-rimmed in October and were bright and rested now, in May, in the morning sun. She said, "I think that's the thing that matters. You know what the rules are, and you follow them because you mean to, not because you have to. And when the rules don't cover something important, you use what's underneath the rules." I looked at her. She was 10 years old. I said, "Yes, that's about right." She said, "I think that's harder than just following the rules." I said, "It is, but it's more honest." She nodded. "Honest," she repeated as if filing it. Climax Part 3. She was quiet for a moment after that. The morning was doing its full May thing around us. The fountain, the flowers, the warm light angling over the east wing roof and falling in bright panels across the garden flagstones. Somewhere in the chestnut row a bird was absolutely committed to making itself heard. She cocked her head at the sound. She said, "That's a wren." I listened. It was. She smiled. Not widely, she was not a wide-smiling sort of person, I'd learned over 3 weeks. Her smiles were quieter than that, more considered. They arrived in her eyes first and then found their way to the rest of her face, like light moving through a room. "Do you think it's the same one?" she said. I said, "I don't know, could be." She listened to the sound for a moment. "I like to think it is," she said. "I know that's not very scientific." "It doesn't have to be scientific," I said. "It can just be what you think." She looked at me sidelong. "You're not what I expected," she said. "When I came to you that morning, I thought you were going to be, I don't know. I thought nothing would happen. I thought you'd just stand there." I said, "For about 3 seconds I did just stand there." She laughed at that. Actually laughed, not performed, not polite, a genuine small laugh that surprised both of us slightly. She said, "But then you didn't." She looked at her book, then at the fountain, then at something beyond the garden wall that wasn't visible from where we stood. She said, "My grandmother, the one who used to be queen, she told me something once. About the people who matter in a royal household. She said it's not always the loudest ones, and it's not always the ones with the titles. She said the ones to pay attention to are the ones who do the right thing when nobody's looking." She paused. "But you knew I was looking," she said. "I was the only one looking." I said, "Then maybe the lesson is slightly different." She said, "What's the lesson?" I thought about it. I said, "Maybe the ones to pay attention to are the ones who do the right thing even when the only person watching is someone who can't do anything about it either way. Someone who just needed them to." She thought about this very carefully. "Yes," she said after a moment, "I think that's better." We were quiet for a moment after that. The wren in the chestnuts went on with its song. The fountain went on with its fountain. The morning went on with the business of becoming a day. She stood up, tucked her book under her arm. She said, "I'm going to tell my grandchildren about this someday, about the guard and the wren." I said, "What will you tell them?" She considered. "I'll tell them that when I asked for help, someone answered, even when they weren't supposed to." She looked at the garden wall, at the sound of the city beginning beyond it. "I'll tell them that's what the rules are for, really, not to stop people from helping, just to make sure the right people are the ones who do it." She turned toward the door. She stopped. Without turning back, she said, "Goodbye, Corporal." I said, "Goodbye, miss." She went inside. Resolution Part 3. That afternoon, when I was completing my shift report, Major Alden stopped by the guardroom. He handed me a document, not the formal kind. The kind that exists between the official lines, a memorandum of note in the guard's personal file, noting in precise but warm language a pattern of judgment, care, and service that had been observed and regarded with approval over the preceding 7 months. He didn't say anything about it. He just handed it to me. I looked at it for a moment. Then I looked at him. He said, "Don't make a thing of it." I said, "No, sir." He said, "The family rotation starts next week. You'll be on South Gate again." I said, "I know." He said, "South Gate is a long post." I said, "It is." He said, "Anything can happen at South Gate." I understood what he was saying. I said, "Yes, sir, it can." He nodded once and left. I put the memorandum in my file. That evening, walking the South Drive back to the guardroom at the end of shift, I passed the horse chestnuts. They were in full leaf, heavy and green, making a sound in the breeze that was almost like rain. Somewhere in them the wren was still singing, or a wren was, it amounts to the same thing. I stopped and listened for a moment. Just a moment. Then I walked on. 11 years at this post, and I thought I understood what the job was. You stand, you hold. You keep the line between what is protected and what is not. That's all true, that's still all true. But here is what I know now that I didn't know on a cold October morning, when a small person in a red coat walked through the mist toward me with something fragile in her cupped hands. The line is not always at the gate. Sometimes it's in the moment when someone needs you to be a person first and a guard second, and you have to decide, in 3 seconds or 12 or the length of a May morning, which one you actually are. She taught me that, and the bird taught her, and the wren in the chestnuts is still singing.